You're watching The Legal Breakdown. So Glenn, another gift from Trump-appointed Judge Aileen Cannon to Trump's defense team in the classified documents case down in Florida. Can you discuss what just happened?
Brian, it is the gift of delay, and Judge Cannon seems to be forever willing to give that gift to Donald Trump. It's becoming clear she has absolutely no intent on getting this case to trial anytime soon, and I'm not talking about before the November presidential election. I don't know when or if she will ever set a trial date, hold the defense's feet to the fire, and actually force Donald Trump to sort of meet his day of reckoning for what are really egregious crimes: obstructing justice, unlawfully retaining classified documents, and endangering our national security by violating our country's espionage law. So here is what she has just done. Donald Trump was required, his lawyers were required to file expert notice under what's called Rule 16 of the Federal Rules of Procedure. So I think within the last 24 hours, there was a deadline that was ready to expire, whereby Donald Trump's lawyers were required to give the prosecutors notice of any expert witnesses they plan to call. They have to name them. They have to give their CV or their resume. They have to give any reports they have generated, and they have to give the conclusions and the bases for those conclusions. It all has to go over to the prosecutors. Well, just as that deadline was expiring, Donald Trump's lawyers ran to Judge Cannon and said, "Oh, we need more time. Give us more time. Give us more time," for no really good reason that we could discern. Right. So what did Judge Cannon do? Hey, take all the time you need. What's the rush? I haven't even set a trial date yet. That's my spin on how Judge Cannon approached answering the defense request for more time. And she kicked it down the road for yet another month, which again, every delay is a gift to Donald Trump.
Now, the Trump team delayed this deadline to disclose what witnesses he may call at trial, quote, should there be one. So what is this saying exactly? Because it kind of reads to me like the Trump team is having trouble finding an expert witness to testify on his behalf.
Yeah, we don't even know what kind of an expert Donald Trump's defense team would propose to call. I mean, you know, part of the nonsense that Donald Trump is forever spouting is that the Presidential Records Act lets him do it. He can take all of our nation's secrets with him when he leaves the presidency, and the Presidential Records Act says the exact opposite, that records belong to the federal government and should remain with the National Archive, and only in a few limited circumstances, like a diary or some personal notes that the president takes regarding his time in office, those can perhaps be the property of the president, but not all of the classified documents and national defense secrets Donald Trump took. So I don't know if he thinks he's going to find an expert witness who will provide the jury with some contorted interpretation of the Presidential Records Act, and I'm sure he's looking for one. But the reality is, Brian, that's not even the kind of thing that a judge would typically allow an expert witness to testify about. Why? Because that has to do with the law, and it is up to the judge to instruct the jury on matters of law. So I don't know. Let me back up. I don't even know that Donald Trump intends to call an expert witness. I think what he intends to do is continue to take advantage of Judge Cannon's lack of impartiality and keep kicking these deadlines down the road. It wouldn't shock me if after all of the deadlines to give expert witness testimony have passed, the defense team said, you know what, we've thought better of it, we're not even going to call an expert witness.
Right. You made a few really excellent points. I think the first one is that why does a judge need to allow an expert witness to interpret the law when a judge's job is quite literally to interpret the law, especially a law like the Presidential Records Act, where there's no ambiguity? It is quite literally the polar opposite of what Donald Trump is contending it actually is. The Presidential Records Act says that these records don't belong to a president in his personal capacity, that they belong to the office of the presidency, to the federal government. There's no ambiguity here. The only reason there might be some ambiguity is because Donald Trump keeps spouting off these bogus claims that it means the polar opposite of what it actually means. And the second point is in terms of calling people, I mean, you know, this whole exercise, at the end of the day, is probably going to amount to, if they do call somebody, just bringing in Jonathan Turley or Alan Dershowitz, and that's it. So we have to wait all of this time for them to call the usual rubber stamps for any bogus interpretations of the law that Republicans usually call, which are these people. But to your point, I think at the end of the day, they're probably not going to call anybody, because aside from folks like that, no one's going to want to put their reputations on the line by going into court and arguing that a law that means one thing actually means something that is the polar opposite. Glenn, for posterity here, and because I do want to be fair, is this kind of deference that Judge Cannon is giving to Trump's defense team, is this kind of deference by a judge with a delay like this usual in any way?
You know, in my experience, it's unprecedented. You know, judges, particularly federal court judges, usually control their docket, their calendar, the schedule of when motions are due, when those motions will be litigated, when jury selection will commence, and when there will be a trial proper. You know, they tend to set those dates in stone very early on in the process. Why? Because everything that is accomplished by the prosecutors and the defense attorneys depend on those deadlines. But Judge Cannon has steadfastly refused to even set a trial date. That is, it's absurd, right? It does a real disservice to moving a case forward, you know, efficiently, never mind expeditiously. And when she last asked the parties, I've said this before, Brian, but it bears repeating, when she last asked the prosecutors and the defense attorneys to propose trial dates that would work for them, Jack Smith said July 8th, and Donald Trump's defense attorneys said August 12th. We can go to trial on August 12th. Here we are mid-June, and Judge Cannon has said, I'm setting no trial date. Not even the one the defense attorneys said worked for their schedule. That, I think, shows that she's not an honest broker of the law and has no interest in moving this case in the direction of a trial. She is doing Donald Trump a favor, though, over and over and over again. And, you know, what, if anything, will Jack Smith do about it? That's something we've discussed before.
Right, we've discussed that before, but it you know, obviously that question is worth beating this drum right now. Does this just add to the bucket of instances that Jack Smith could bring forward if he were to appeal Judge Cannon even being on this case and seek some type of motion for recusal?
Yeah, I think the question we have to begin asking ourselves, and by extension, Jack Smith and his team, will you permit Judge Cannon to indefinitely delay this trial week after week, month after month? We're now coming up on year after year. Will you allow her to do that? Or at some point, will you feel compelled to step in and do what the law allows, which is simply file the motion saying, you know, under the federal law, her impartiality might reasonably be questioned given her pattern of conduct to the extreme advantage of Donald Trump. And this issue needs to be litigated and resolved ultimately by the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals. Brian, that is the only way, one, Judge Cannon might be forced to move the case in the direction of a trial, and two, the people will be able to have some confidence in the outcome of the proceedings, because if you don't litigate the recusal issue, the issue to remove her because her impartiality might reasonably be questioned, then how in the world can we have confidence in the outcome, particularly if she orchestrates a dismissal during the course of the trial, which can't be appealed by Jack Smith under certain circumstances?
Well, just to dig into this for a quick moment, can you come up with a reason why you think Jack Smith is so hell-bent against actually bringing forward this motion for a recusal? Is it because he thinks, you know, we've spoken about this before, that if you take a step like that and you lose, then you're facing a hostile judge? But then my pushback to that would be, you're already facing a hostile judge. The other pushback might be, well, Jack Smith wants to make sure that he has enough definitive proof so that, you know, he doesn't put forward this motion only to then lose at the 11th Circuit. But, you know, you and I have spoken in the past about how the bucket runneth over in terms of the amount of instances that he can bring forward, whether it's Aileen Cannon already being rebuked by the 11th Circuit for interfering on his behalf in the early days of this process, her threatening to give jury instructions that contained a bogus interpretation of the Presidential Records Act, her delaying indefinitely, to your earlier point, the trial date for this. I mean, the list of reasons goes on and on.
Yeah, and I think you identified the two most likely reasons Jack Smith has, at least thus far, chosen not to file a motion to seek her removal that he can then litigate up through the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals. And I think we have to talk about this against the backdrop of the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals ruling previously that Judge Cannon abused her judicial discretion. She did something to Donald Trump's benefit that the law does not allow. That is a devastating finding and ruling from an appellate court about a trial court judge. She already has a strike against her. But the two reasons that you identify, one, listen, as a career prosecutor, I can tell you I never wanted to unnecessarily antagonize a judge. because not only might I have to, in the event I lose a motion to have the judge removed, not only will I have to litigate the trial before that very judge, but I'm going to have other cases in front of that judge. So not wanting to antagonize a judge is one reason. However, I do not think Judge Cannon could be any more antagonistic toward Jack Smith and his prosecutors or this case generally. So I don't think that's a good reason. So I'm going to say that it's the second reason that is probably driving Jack Smith's decision. For whatever reason, he is reaching a different conclusion about whether there is truly enough evidence to win the recusal motion. I'm sure he understands there's enough evidence to bring it, to support the filing of a recusal motion, but in his determination, and listen, he's got a lot of great prosecutors on his team, some who used to be homicide prosecutors with me at the D.C. U.S. Attorney's Office, and a lot of smart people, a lot of great appellate lawyers, and I'm sure they are researching and drilling down, probably with each new Judge Cannon ruling and development that seems more outrageous than the last, and they're probably trying to decide, do we believe we have a strong enough case that, if not a sure winner, that we can make a very strong and compelling argument in favor of having her removed from the case. And for whatever reason, they're perhaps viewing the evidence differently than this old career prosecutor is. I think the motion needs to be made, but maybe Jack Smith and his team aren't quite there yet.
Well, I think it's important that you and I and other folks in the media keep beating this drum, because clearly we're reaching a different decision than they are. But obviously, also, Judge Cannon is giving more and more fodder almost by the day, so hopefully Jack Smith will reconsider. With that said, we will obviously stay on top of any developments that happen in this Florida case, as well as the other prosecutions that Trump is contending with right now. For those watching, if you want to follow along and you're not yet subscribed to both of our channels, please make sure to subscribe. The links are right here on this screen. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.